Hello, listeners. This is Janine
and Kristen
from Henrico Casa. You are listening to our podcast, Vigilant Voices. Living life every day. Hello, listeners. Thank you for joining us for this new guest episode of our Vigilant Voices podcast.
We hope you are enjoying the festivities associated with this holiday season, but we also know that this may not necessarily be a joyful time for you or the children in your life.
It's a time of big emotions, I think that's for sure. And if you love the holidays and are seeing family and friends, well, hopefully those are positive emotions.
Right.
But if you have experienced loss or are walking through a transition, those emotions could be a lot heavier.
Yeah, and that's why we've invited today's guest to join us on the podcast. Andrew Dooley is here with us from Comfort Zone Camp. They are a fellow nonprofit organization advocating for the needs of children, but specifically children who have lost a loved one.
We are so glad to have Andrew here with us today to help us navigate the holidays with children who are grieving. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Yes, welcome. We're so grateful for you and the many ways that Comfort Zone Camp helps children who have experienced loss. But before we dive into your work, we were hoping you could just tell us about you. What's your story?
Absolutely. And I'll kind of put it in the context of Comfort Zone and my relationship to Comfort Zone.
Yeah.
I started out volunteering as a big buddy back in 2009.
Okay.
Fell in love with the experience from my first camp. One of my coworkers had a photo up in his cubicle of Comfort Zone. And I'd been looking to do some kind of volunteer work, especially something with kids. And once he explained it to me, it just made sense. My mom had passed away about 3 years prior.
Okay.
And that was an incredibly painful experience. And my uncle had passed away when I was 6.
Yeah.
My cousins were 9 and 12. So I saw the impact that it had on them.
Yeah.
So as soon as I was aware of this organization, I knew it was something I had to get involved with.
Yeah.
And I've been volunteering with them ever since, and joined staff 2.5 years ago, and love what I do.
I love that.
Oh, we love when personal and professional lines kind of start to cross.
Yeah.
That's
Thank you for
great.
sharing that. So we'll learn a little bit more, I think, as you chat with us today. But the work that you and your team at Comfort Zone Camp does is so meaningful. But unfortunately, right, it's necessary because while we hate to think about it, children do experience loss, and sometimes it's really big loss. And I've seen your mission summarized in 3 simple words, which I think is great: grieve, heal, grow. So, Andrew, could you tell us a little bit more about that process and what it looks like for the children you serve?
Yeah, and it might be helpful for me to talk a little bit about our program and kind of what that looks like.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
And how this fits into that kind of context.
Yes.
So Lynn Hughes, our founder and CEO, created Comfort Zone. She had lost both of her parents by the age of 12.
Wow.
She found summer camp, and that was her really happy place. She took sort of
Makes
the
sense.
worst part of her life, the best part of her life, put them together, and out of that was born Comfort Zone Camp.
Yeah.
And what's really amazing about it is that kids grieve in spurts. So we could sit around and talk about heavy topics all day long.
Right.
They don't operate that way. And our camp schedule, when the kids get out there, it's designed for them to interact with their grief a little bit and then run around and do some fun camp games.
Yeah.
Sure.
So it's a lot of fun and reintroducing them to fun. It also helps let them realize that they are not alone.
Yeah.
A lot of times these kids are walking through their hallways and they have a loss and they feel different. And I imagine that some of your kids that you all work
Absolutely.
with have a similar thing where they
Isolating.
feel
Yeah.
isolated, they feel different from their
Right.
peers. So being in an environment where they are surrounded by others who can understand it and kind of get what they're going through is a pretty powerful
Built-in
experience.
community almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they have the opportunity throughout the weekend to share their story about their loved one and be validated through that, to have people ask them questions and show curiosity around that. To learn ways to stay connected to their loved one.
Okay.
We teach them coping skills.
Yeah.
It's a pretty incredible experience, and it's highly, highly impactful.
Yeah. And when you think of children, their bandwidth for processing
Right.
things, it's great that it's kind of broken down.
It has to be. Attention
Yeah,
span.
fit within what they can kind of handle and process. The 3 words that we saw: grieve, heal, grow. Could you maybe explain that a little more?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So grief is going to come along with that loss.
Sure.
So when I tell people I volunteer at Comfort Zone Camp, a lot of times they're like, "Ooh, you
that's
volunteer at
right,
grief camp? That sounds really sad,
yeah.
right?" What they don't realize is that it is a summer camp. So the bad things already happened. The grief is already there.
That's right.
So we get to just come in and create a space for them that is supportive,
And new
so that they
memories,
can
too.
grieve.
And they're not
then
alone,
through that
right?
presence, that's right.
Yeah.
They are able to heal through that, being able to share their story. Every time you share your story, it gets a little bit lighter.
Yeah.
So by giving them that opportunity, we allow them to kind of lighten their load to move towards and through their grief instead of sitting and kind of staying stuck with it.
Yeah.
And then through that process, obviously, that's a growth process. One other thing that's really cool about our program is that we allow our kids to come back year after year. So it's really neat because you can see the growth.
Yeah.
I've had little
amazing.
buddies that were matched with me 7 times over, over
that.
different years. And it's really cool because you can, 10 years old, now they're 18, and you can just see the growth that happens.
Yeah.
So it's a really, really cool thing to be able to actually witness that growth as they
I
continue
love
to come
that.
back.
And then maybe they can help others,
Yes,
which is
and become a big buddy,
yeah.
right?
So one of the cool things, I have a little buddy. I met him when he was 10 years old. He's now 23.
Okay.
We'll go out and we'll have dinner, drinks. He'll ask me advice for girls that he's dating or whatnot, which is hilarious. But he comes out and he's a volunteer. He's a big buddy also.
I love that.
See, that's
And the
amazing.
first time he came out as a big buddy was just just such a proud moment for me.
Yeah.
To be able to see this kid that I've watched him grow up and move through this grief process, and to see him so devoted to wanting to come back and help others in that same way, it's really powerful. And we have a lot of campers that are turned volunteers. So it's a really, really neat thing to see that part of the process as well.
A full circle
Full circle.
moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I love that.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So, Andrew, something else that comes to mind talking about grief is what we see at CASA is that the children we serve, they all grieve a little differently, right? No one reacts to something like that in the same way. And for a lot of the children we serve, it may or may not be the death of a parent, but there is a loss. They've lost contact with a caregiver, extended family. Maybe they've lost their family traditions now that they're living in a foster home, right? So there's a lot to grieve. But is there a process that you would say is the same for everyone to kind of walk through?
Yeah. So a couple of things with that. First and foremost, I think it's important to kind of talk a little bit about the fact that people have so many expectations on what grief should look like.
So true.
Our kids come out and they're like, well, they told me that I've been crying for too long, I need to get over it. Or my parents tell me that I'm not crying enough. And so there's all these expectations around what that grief should look like. You all probably with your kids have the same type of thing where a lot of their behaviors, people can look at that and be like, oh, this is a bad behavior, this is attention seeking. But really it is a grief response and they're just navigating it the best way that they can, which is why it's so important for you to be able to support them. One thing that's kind of interesting that you all may not know is that we did a foster care program. So Comfort Zone partnered with, it was UMFS back in the day.
Of course.
And we did a program for their kids that were in foster care. And it was absolutely amazing.
I'm sure.
And what was really striking about it was the process that we have, our programming is very customizable. It can fit just about any type of grief. So what I can tell you from being in the healing circles with kids that weekend is that their grief is very similar to the grief that our campers that are dealing with the loss of a parent is. So I would say that while I would never say they're the same, right? Because there's obvious differences, I do think that grief is very, very similar and that there's a lot in common in terms of how we can approach that to make sure that they're being supported and they have what they need.
Yeah. That makes total
It
sense.
makes a lot of sense. And I think we talk about this of it's grief, it's trauma, all of those behaviors and feelings, right, that they're experiencing, and we have to help them process. And so I guess as a little bit of a follow-up, but maybe a shift. So it is the holiday season. So, we see sometimes that during the holidays, children experience even bigger feelings. And sometimes then they start having these big swings in emotion. How can we help those children navigate those feelings this time of year?
I think just with feelings in general, one of the things you want to do is just acknowledge and validate. So first and foremost, know that those feelings are going to be heightened during this season and be prepared to kind of help, support them and be there for them for that. But I think another thing that you all mentioned the word tradition earlier. I think this is where it comes into play a lot, where just having good, clear communication, approach that kid and say, hey, I know that this holiday season is going to look a little bit different for you. How would you like for that to look? What traditions would you like to keep? What traditions would you like to change? How can we make this special for you? Do you want me to fix a certain breakfast for you that morning? Or, do we want to open a gift Christmas Eve or whatever it is? So kind of creating those different types of traditions, but allowing them to be part of that process and being flexible with being willing to change whatever that needs and creating that holiday for them.
I like that. I think it's asking the children what they need.
I know sometimes we make assumptions or we're trying to give them what they need, but we don't think to just
ask them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's great.
And one thing to be prepared of, if you are in this position, especially if you have multiple kids or if this is a shared loss, not everyone will have the same vision.
Right.
That's true.
So you may have to do a little bit of navigating of, all right,
Yeah.
somebody might be like, I don't want to have anything. Somebody might I want to have all the just pictures and everything. And you're like, all right, well, we're going to have to
How
find
do
some kind of
we-
middle ground.
Yeah,
So I would say be
balance
prepared
this.
for that part of it. But yeah, absolutely bring them in and kind of allowing them some agency in that conversation.
Yeah,
Love
I
it.
love that. That makes total sense. Similarly to the kids experience big emotions, it's also a time when maybe the caregiver is experiencing big emotions as well. Maybe because they also experienced a loss, but maybe it could also be them just responding to the children's behaviors, right? Because it can kind of throw you off. And honestly, sometimes it's just dealing with expectations or unmet expectations, right?
Yes.
So I guess, do you have words of advice for those caregivers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, again, just like with the kids, acknowledge and validate your own feelings. I think
Yeah.
it's really important to be present and be aware of what feelings you are feeling. You talked about expectations. Something we talk about at camp, and I think it's relevant here, is check your expectations at the door. So as our volunteers come in, we tell them, please don't come in with any expectations for your little buddy. We want you to meet them where they are
Yeah.
and just be present, and whatever they need for that weekend, just be flexible and allow them to kind of have that, and don't force some kind of agenda on them. So I
Sure.
think a similar type of thing of don't have expectations for this. Just be there and be flexible and kind of help support them in the way that they need that.
Yeah.
Would be one of my biggest kind of recommendations for that. And then it's kind of like the oxygen mask, right? Make
Right.
sure you're taking care of yourself as well.
Yeah.
Before you're able to do that, you're just way more effective to be able to support others if you are making sure that you are taking care of yourself. So just another kind of note with that.
Yeah, so true.
Which
Yeah.
makes, again, total sense. So, Andrew, as we start to wrap up our episode, we always like to ask our guests to share their vision for children. For instance, at CASA, we are working towards our vision for every child to have a safe home. What about you? What's the vision that drives you and your work at Comfort Zone Camp?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do love you all's mission, by the way. So I love being able to be here with another organization
Thank you.
whose mission I
Thank
really
you.
value and
Yes.
think is just so important. For me, I think a lot of it is, so I sit in these healing circles. I facilitate some of these as a healing circle leader. I come out and volunteer as a big buddy. And whenever I'm in these groups, right, you can see the impact. And especially if I'm leading that group, when I get to the end of the weekend and I can look around at my group at the very end and feel like I'm walking away with all of my people getting what they need, that's what I look for.
That's a win.
Yeah, that's a win for me. And more globally for Comfort Zone, this is our 25th anniversary.
Oh,
so very exciting.
congratulations.
Yeah.
That is. That's a
So
big
we're very
milestone.
excited. We've been celebrating that this year.
Yes.
Very, very exciting. We also hit a really cool milestone earlier this year of 25,000 campers served.
Oh, wow.
So just continuing to, serve that mission and try and reach as many kids and help as many
Yeah.
kids as we can. I think that's another kind of driving factor for what we do.
Without a doubt.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
You're similar as in the milestones. Like, we're so proud of the number of children we serve. We also hate that we have to serve that many
Yes,
children.
right.
There's like
Yeah.
this balance there of, gosh, that many children need you.
But it's
Yeah.
needed.
So
Yeah.
glad that you can be there.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
amazing.
It's amazing.
Gosh, so as we know around this table, like, we're doing things professionally to help children, but we can all play a part in moving our community towards these visions that we have. And when we know better, we do better for the children in our lives. So, Andrew, we're curious, as we go into the holidays, what just simple call to action would you leave us all with?
Yeah, I think get involved. So if you can, get involved with CASA, get involved with Comfort Zone Camp. Go and do something where you can support people in your community.
Yeah.
And then even locally, look for ways that you can support the people in your life. So show up for them. And if somebody's asking you for help, it is okay to accept that help. I know a lot of times it can be hard to ask for or accept help because
Right.
we feel like
Yeah.
we're weak or we're a burden. But if you've ever been asked to support somebody or help somebody,
Yeah.
usually you feel honored, right?
Yes,
That's how I
yeah.
feel whenever I'm asked to do it. So just know that if somebody is offering help or if you're asking, that person is likely to feel honored that you thought enough of them to trust them to be able to come in and
That's
help
so
support
true.
you. So
Yeah.
also feel free to ask for help, but get out there and help other people as well.
Yeah. That's great. We can all just look for opportunities like that this holiday season.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
Thank
Thank y'all
you
for having me.
so
This was
much.
great.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Vigilant Voices, Henrico Casa's new podcast. We have a vision for all children to live in safe, healthy homes. You can help us make that happen. Tell a friend about our podcast and find us on social media.
I believe in a better day.